By the time the first bell for evening prayers stopped shuddering over Ashcombe village, Helena Fraser's skirts were dark to the knee, and her gloves had taken in so much rain they clung like cold skin. March had a way of pretending at spring, and then turning sharp again before dusk. Tonight the wind came down from the moor with needles in it. She kept walking anyway, one hand tight around the parcel of mended stockings Lady Fraser had sent her to deliver, the other pressed at her side where her stays pinched when she hurried. "Not too slow, Helena. Remember, charity is all very well, but idleness is vulgar." Lady Fraser's voice had followed her out of the house as neatly as if the lady had stitched it to Helena's cloak. At 22, Helena lived in a narrowing corner of her father's old world. When he had been alive, Mr. Fraser had been received with respect in the county. A capable steward, a meticulous correspondent, the sort of man rectors consulted and magistrates greeted by name. After his death, his daughter discovered how quickly esteem could be inherited by no one at all. She had no dowry worth naming, no brother to shield her, and no mother living. She had instead a stepmother who called herself practical, and everyone else called poor Lady Fraser so burdened because pity tends to follow lace cuffs and an excellent carriage pair. In drawing rooms, Helena was plain, useful Helena, said with approving kindness by women who asked her to fetch shawls and carry tea trays. Plain until candlelight touched the loose sweep of her dark hair and revealed eyes too direct for comfort. Useful until she answered a question with more precision than anyone expected from a dependent relation. She had learned to keep her face calm when they forgot she stood in the room. She had learned to fold anger into silence so tightly it looked like obedience. The Frasers' house at Nethervale had once held her father's books in a bright west parlour. Lady Fraser had moved most of them to a damp side room and taken the shelves for porcelain. Helena still visited the little room at night with a candle cupped in her hand, reading account ledgers and Latin quotations and old sermons as if they were contraband. The books smelled of dust and leather and her childhood. In them she found a kind of order no person in that house offered her. She found another order in song, though she never called it that aloud. Her voice was the one possession she kept unadvertised. She used it when everyone slept, or when she walked alone between hedgerows and knew the rain would swallow sound. Her father had taught her old Scots airs when she was small, laments, cradle songs, hymns with worn edges. "A tune will hold you together," he had once told her, smiling into his ledger as he wrote, "when good sense is not enough." After he died, she discovered he had been right. That afternoon, good sense had failed her. Lady Fraser sent for her before luncheon and made her stand while she remained seated at her escritoire, sorting invitations with 2 fingers and a look of disciplined fatigue. "You are not growing younger, Helena," she said, "and gratitude is an obligation, not an ornament. Mr. Pritchard has shown interest." Helena knew Mr. Pritchard. Everyone did. He had begun as a moneylender to tradesmen and ended as a creditor to half the county's embarrassed gentry. He smelled of cloves and old wool, laughed too loudly, and looked at women as though pricing bolts of cloth. Lady Fraser did not look up. "I have told him that before summer we may hope for a settled arrangement. You will, of course, behave with sense." The room had gone very still. Helena heard the clock on the mantel click once, then again. "With respect," she said carefully, "you cannot mean to promise my hand without asking me." Lady Fraser lifted her eyes at last, mild and glittering. "My dear girl, what could you possibly prefer? Dependence forever. You have no money, no prospects, and very little beauty to trade on. Mr. Pritchard is solvent. You should thank Providence. I would rather earn my bread. By what means? Reading your father's scraps? Singing to yourself in passageways?" Lady Fraser's smile thinned. "Do not mistake my patience for weakness. Your father left obligations. I have borne them. If you force me to choose between your sensibilities and my household's security, you will lose." Helena had stood through the rest of the interview without speaking. If she had spoken, she might have shattered something. Lady Fraser dismissed her with instructions about stockings for the rector's wife and notes for the milliner, as though she had merely rearranged flower vases and not a human future. Now, in the rain, Helena cut across the lower lane instead of turning home directly. The parcel under her arm was damp at the edges. She should have been thinking of practical steps. Names to write, situations to seek, distant cousins to trouble. But panic is not practical. It rose in her throat like smoke. Every path she could see ended in dependence. On Lady Fraser's temper, on Mr. Pritchard's appetite, on the county's appetite for scandal. Ashcombe Chapel sat above the village, stone darkened by weather and lichen silvering the old graves. She had gone there often as a child with her father, who preferred churchyards in rain because no one talked there for long. Tonight the gate groaned when she pushed it, and the yews exhaled their resinous bitterness into the wet air. The late Countess's grave lay near the eastern wall, marked by a pale slab and ironwork that had begun to rust where lilies leaned against it. Someone had brought fresh flowers, but the rain had turned their white petals brown at the edges. Helena stopped before the stone because she had no strength left to walk farther. She knew of Lady Ashcombe as everyone did. Gracious, musical, dead before 30. Her death the previous autumn had wrapped the big house in black cloth and whispers. The Earl had withdrawn from county life almost entirely. His son, not yet 5, was said to have stopped speaking. Helena set down the damp parcel on a nearby bench and pressed both hands to the top of the gravestone, cold seeping straight through her gloves. She drew breath and failed to hold it, drew another. The pressure in her chest sharpened until she thought she might truly cry out. Instead she sang, quietly at first, more hum than word, the old lament her father had taught her in winters when the fire burned low and money burned lower. Then the words came, Scott soft and aching, a lullaby that spoke of rain on stone, of hands unclasped, of sleep that was not forgetfulness, but mercy. Her voice did not soar, it steadied. Line by line her breath found rhythm. The panic ebbed enough for thought to return. When the song ended, the rain sounded loud again. "You there!" The voice came from the darkness near the yew hedge, deep and cut short, as if speech itself offended it. Helena started so hard her hands slipped on wet stone. A tall figure detached from shadow and stepped into the open path. No livery. Black coat, black hat. Rain glistening along the shoulders. Even before she saw his face clearly, she knew. Lord Ashcombe. He came to a stop 3 paces from her. In lamplight he would likely have been handsome. In the dim, wet dusk he looked severe enough to be carved from the same stone as the monuments behind him. His expression was not anger exactly, but something more dangerous, controlled devastation. "How?" he said, each word precise. "Do you know that song?" Helena's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. She dropped into a curtsy because habit survived terror. "My lord, I beg pardon. I did not know anyone was here. That was my wife's song." His jaw tightened. "She sang it to my son every night." "I did not know," Helena repeated, and now her voice shook despite her. "My father taught it to me when I was little. It is old. In his family before him." Ashcombe's eyes held hers, searching for mockery, calculation, intrusion. anything he expected to find in a strange woman singing at his wife's grave. Rain ticked off the brim of his hat. Somewhere in the trees a rook complained. "People have used this place for displays before," he said. "Condolence performed for an audience. I have little tolerance left for performance." If she had possessed caution enough, Helena might have apologized again and withdrawn. But fear, once stretched too far, can snap into clarity. "My lord," she said, meeting that frozen stare, "grief does not belong to rank." Silence. For one suspended moment she was certain she had ruined herself utterly. Then his gaze shifted, not softening exactly, but changing, as if he had looked at a portrait and discovered the paint still wet. "What is your name?" he asked. "Helena Fraser." "Of Nether Vale?" "Yes, my lord." He nodded once, curtly, as though confirming an item in an account. "Take your parcel. You are soaked through." She bent, fingers numb, and retrieved it. "I did not mean disrespect." "No," he said after a beat. "I believe you did not." He stepped aside from the path. "Dismissal, permission both." Helena made another curtsy and moved past him toward the gate, aware of his stillness behind her like a held breath. She did not look back until she reached the lane. By then he had returned to shadow near the grave, indistinguishable from the yews. At Nether Vale the lamps were lit and dinner nearly served. Lady Fraser observed Helena's wet cloak with theatrical dismay and made her stand near the door while footmen brought in dishes. "Really, Helena, one would think you sought to advertise your martyrdom. I was delayed at the chapel. Praying for better sense, I hope." Lady Fraser tasted soup. "Mr. Pritchard dined here yesterday. He is prepared to be generous about settlements, considering your circumstances." Helena's spoon remained untouched. "I will not have him." Lady Fraser set down her spoon with care. "You speak as if your will were a factor. It is not. Your father's papers are not tidy, and there are claims against his name that I have thus far contained. If you insist on ingratitude, do not expect continued shelter." It was not the first time she had heard mention of claims, but tonight the words bit deeper. Her father, meticulous to absurdity, leaving disorder. The idea had always jarred. Yet Lady Fraser said it with such polished certainty that challenge seemed childish. Helena pressed her napkin between damp palms and said nothing. The room smelled of roast game and beeswax and control. Later, in her narrow attic room, she peeled off wet gloves and spread them by the grate. Her hands shook now that no one could see. If Lady Fraser truly held debts in her father's name, Helena had almost no leverage at all. A dependent woman refusing a prudent marriage could be cast out with little fuss and less sympathy. Governess posts were scarce. References everything. One rumour from Lady Fraser that Helena was difficult, ungrateful, unstable, and doors would close before she reached them. She knelt by the trunk that held her father's remaining things: 2 ledgers, a brass compass, letters tied in fading ribbon. Under the top bundle lay a scrap of music in his hand, only 6 bars, ink blotched at the corner where he had laughed while writing. She traced the notes with one finger. "A tune will hold you together." The next morning brought no reprieve. Lady Fraser sent her to copy invitations, mend lace, and sit with an elderly aunt who repeated herself every quarter hour. By noon, Helena's nerves were strung so tight she flinched when the door-knocker sounded. A servant entered the morning room and bowed. "A message for Miss Fraser, my lady, from Ashcombe House." Lady Fraser's brows rose. "For Miss Fraser?" Helena took the folded note with fingers suddenly cold again. The seal was plain black wax, impressed with the Ashcombe crest. Inside the hand was firm and spare. "Miss Fraser, if you are willing, present yourself at Ashcombe House at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I wish to discuss a temporary position concerning my son's instruction. Lady Fraser's fan went still. How extraordinary, she said lightly, and how very swift after your pious excursion to the chapel. Heat climbed Helena's neck. I do not know why he writes. I think we may all guess. Lady Fraser smiled for the aunt's benefit, then dropped it when the old woman looked away. You will go, of course, but understand me, any impropriety, any hint that you are trading on a grieving man's vulnerability, and I shall be obliged to protect this household's reputation. My reputation appears to concern no one. Reputation, Lady Fraser said, belongs to those who can afford to keep it. At 4 precisely, Helena stood in Ashcombe House's outer hall, beneath portraits of armoured ancestors and women with composed hands. The butler received her with grave politeness that stopped 1 degree short of warmth. She was shown not to a drawing-room, but to a small library overlooking winter-stripped gardens. Lord Ashcombe entered without escort. In daylight he seemed less spectral, more exhausted. Grief had hollowed him. Discipline held the shape. Miss Fraser, he inclined his head, thank you for coming. I came because you requested it, my lord. He accepted the correction with no offence. My son had a nurse, then 2 governesses. Neither arrangement succeeded. He does not speak, he does not sleep unless carried to collapse. Last night, for the first time in months, he slept after hearing that song through an open window. Helena blinked. He heard me. He hears more than he answers. Ashcombe paused. I require someone for a temporary term, schoolroom order, basic lessons, music if possible. No social obligations. Wages proper to the position, paid monthly. A beat. You may refuse. Refuse and walk back to Lady Fraser's ledger smile and Mr. Pritchard's hand at her elbow before summer. Helena clasped her hands to hide their tremor. If I accept, I would need clear terms in writing. Something like approval flickered in his expression. You shall have them. And, she added, surprising herself with the boldness, I serve your son, not gossip. Then we are agreed. His voice cooled. You will find I have little patience for gossip. When she left Ashcombe House, the rain had stopped. The sky over the chapel hill was a hard, rinsed blue, and the road back to Nethervale looked exactly as it had the day before, rutted, familiar, unavoidable. Yet the ground under her feet felt altered. She had not escaped. Not yet. Lady Fraser would not yield control gently. Perhaps she would not yield at all. But for the first time in months, Helena held something that was hers by contract, not charity. Work, wages, a narrow ledge above the drop. If she slipped, she would still fall a long way. She knew it with every step. She also knew with equal certainty that she would rather climb in the dark than be handed, smiling, into a cage. She reached Nethervale after dark, boots caked at the hem, pulse steadier only because exhaustion had blunted everything else. Lady Fraser was waiting in the blue parlour with a lamp turned high and her sewing untouched in her lap, as if she had arranged herself there to be discovered in patient suffering. Well, she said, before Helena had removed her cloak, did his lordship offer alms, employment, or a lecture? Employment, Helena answered. Temporary, as governess and music instructor to his son. The needle in Lady Fraser's hand paused. How efficient! He offered written terms. Wages paid monthly. Monthly, Lady Fraser gave a soft laugh. How modern! And where did this benevolent arrangement begin? At a grave, in the rain, with a song fit to draw tears from statues? Helena forced her wet fingers to unclench. It began because his child needs instruction. It began, Lady Fraser said, each word light and sharp. Because men in mourning are irrational, and girls without dowries are ambitious when cornered. I did not ask your leave, Helena said quietly. Only your acknowledgement. I begin tomorrow. Lady Fraser looked at her for a long moment, then laid the sewing aside and rose. You will remember, she said, crossing to stand very near, that you still reside under my roof, eat at my table, and carry your father's unsettled affairs in your name. One whisper against this household, one indiscretion, and I shall protect myself first. Do not test me. Helena held her gaze. I have no intention of scandal. Intention, Lady Fraser replied, smiling without warmth, is rarely what people remember. Ashcombe House took her in with impeccable manners and visible reluctance. A chamber was made ready for her in the east wing, 2 floors below the nursery, and 1 floor above the servants' corridor, a location that announced both usefulness and limits. Mrs. Dent, the housekeeper, gave instructions with polished correctness, and never once used Helena's name. Nurse Wilkes watched her as one might watch a candle near curtains, carefully, with prior alarm. Footmen moved around her without quite moving for her. No one was rude, no one welcomed her. The child did not greet her at all. He sat in the schoolroom window seat when she first entered, small hands folded in his lap, gaze fixed on the bare branches beyond the glass. He was a fine-boned boy, his mother's mouth set in his father's silence. A set of blocks lay untouched on the carpet beside him. "Good morning," Helena said, keeping her tone plain. "I am Miss Fraser." He did not turn. Nurse Wilkes hovered, apologetic and defensive at once. "Master has had difficult mornings since autumn. He eats little at breakfast, better at supper if he sleeps, which he mostly does not." Helena nodded. "Then we begin with what is possible." What was possible at first was very little. The boy would sit if placed, but not answer questions, not point to letters, not take up chalk. If she read aloud, he listened without expression. If she paused, he remained still as carved wood. Twice he startled at a door closing and climbed beneath the table, knees to chest, refusing touch from anyone but Wilkes. By the 3rd day, Helena stopped trying to force lessons into silence and began giving shape to the hours instead. She set objects in order and named them aloud as she moved. Slate, book, comb, cup. She read short passages from a primer, then from tales with rhythm but no sudden noise. At dusk, when his breathing grew quick and his eyes fixed on corners where nothing stood, she hummed under her breath while folding linen, pretending not to notice whether he listened. He listened. The first sign was not speech but sleep. One evening he drifted off with his head against the nursery chair arm, while she sang barely above a whisper. The old lament softened into cradle-time measure. Nurse Wilkes began to cry from sheer relief and tried to hide it by turning toward the fire. Word travelled through the corridors faster than reason. By week's end, Helena heard 2 maids stop speaking when she entered the linen room. In the lower passage, a groom said to another, "Not softly enough. Grief's a ladder for some folk." At dinner, in the small governess parlour, a visiting tutor from the neighbouring estate remarked with false innocence, "Unusual, isn't it, for a gentleman to appoint so quickly from outside references?" Helena answered, without looking up from her plate. "Unusual circumstances rarely consult custom." He did not ask another question. Lord Ashcombe remained formal. He met her in corridors with a brief inclination of the head and practical inquiries. Did the child eat? Did he sleep? Did he tolerate numbers? Never once did he mention the graveyard. Never once did he ask her to sing before anyone else. Yet she was always aware of him, of the held tension in his posture when his son woke crying, of the way he stopped outside the nursery door at night and stood listening before forcing himself to move on. At the end of her first full week, he handed her a paper in his library. Her contract, signed and witnessed, wages specified exactly as promised. "You asked for terms in writing," he said. "You were right to do so." She read every line before she answered. "Thank you, my lord." His mouth tightened. Approval, perhaps, or fatigue. "If anyone in this house makes your work harder than it already is, inform Mrs. Dent." The instruction was precise. The reality remained unchanged. Mrs. Dent could correct a servant for open impertinence. She could not silence suspicion. Helena understood that, and wasted no complaint on trifles. She had known colder rooms than these. What she had not expected was how swiftly Lady Fraser would turn the county's tongue against her. The first hint came by post, a note from an acquaintance who had always called Helena dear child, and now wrote, "I hope reports are exaggerated, and that you maintain propriety in all things, for people speak unkindly when rank and youth are mingled in sorrow." The second came from the vicar's wife, full of pious concern and unnecessary advice about female modesty. The third was blunt, unsigned, and left at the village shop. Widowers are not charity schools. Helena burned that one in the schoolroom grate and watched the edges blacken. 3 days later, a footman brought up a sealed packet from Nether Vale marked "Urgent." Inside were copies of promissory notes she had never seen, each bearing her father's name in a hand close enough to his to sting her eyes. Amounts, dates, witnesses. At the bottom of Lady Fraser's accompanying letter, in elegantly slanted ink, stood a single line: "Do not force me to place these before Mr. Pritchard's solicitor. A public engagement would resolve much unpleasantness." Helena read the letter twice, then a third time, then set it flat beside the notes and made herself examine them as she would any school exercise. The signatures were skilled imitations, yet something in the pressure looked wrong. Her father's true hand leaned slightly forward at the close of Fraser. These ended bluntly, as if copied by sight. The wax seals were smudged where one would expect crisp edges from a careful clerk. 2 notes were dated on Sundays, when her father never conducted business beyond church accounts. She folded the packet with deliberate care and locked it in her writing box. That evening, Lord Ashcombe found her in the schoolroom sorting slates while the boys stacked wooden letters in silent rows on the carpet. "You have had troubling correspondence," he said, not as a question. She kept her face composed. "Family matters, my lord?" "Lady Fraser has called twice this week, asking to see me." "I declined." Helena's hand stilled. "On what pretext?" "The usual concern for your welfare, also concern for mine." His gaze held hers, cool and direct. "If there is coercion involved, say so." Pride rose first, useless, reflexive. Then caution. She could not fling accusations without proof. She would not be another rumour in his house. "There are financial claims in my father's name," she said carefully. "I have reason to doubt their accuracy. Until I can verify facts, I would rather not involve you." A long pause. "At Ashcombe," he said at last, "you are employed, not owned. Keep that distinction clear for yourself as much as for others." It was not comfort, it was better. Complications bred in paper. Because the boy now tolerated half-hour intervals at the schoolroom table, Helena was given additional tasks to fill the quiet stretches. Ordering nursery accounts, cataloguing music left from the late Countess, and separating educational subscriptions from household miscellany. Boxes arrived from a disused cabinet in the west corridor. Exercise books, hymn sheets, invoices for village school coal, correspondence tied by year. Helena worked at the high table near the window, while the child traced circles on scrap paper beside her. Rain tapped the panes. Ink dried slowly in the damp. By habit, she checked dates, signatures, and endorsements as she sorted. Her father had taught her that most lies collapse at the edge where one record touches another. On Tuesday, she found an invoice for school copybooks paid twice in different ledgers. On Wednesday, a receipt for parish blankets endorsed by a steward who had left Ashcombe 6 months earlier. On Thursday, a folded memorandum regarding the late Countess's charitable bequest to village widows and girls' instruction, marked dispersed with no accompanying roll of recipients. The dispersal authorisation bore Lady Fraser's name as intermediary for local distribution, witnessed by a clerk Helena had never heard of. She frowned and pulled another bundle. There was no covering letter from the Countess on that date, no instruction in her usual hand. The wax seal on the authorisation was Ashcombe's crest, but the impression was shallow, off-centre, as if pressed in haste or with a copy die. Worse, the date line listed the 11th of October, 3 days after the Countess's recorded death. Helena stared at that date until the numbers blurred. "Miss," a small voice whispered. She looked down so quickly her chair scraped. The boy had not spoken a full word in her presence before. He pointed at the page under her hand, then at her face, eyes wide with alarm at her stillness. She softened her voice at once. "It's all right. Thank you." She moved the papers aside and offered him a fresh sheet. "Shall we draw a house?" He nodded once, mute again, but his hand crept toward her sleeve while he drew. That night she copied the suspect dates into her notebook by candlelight. She added details from Lady Fraser's notes and the promissory papers. She marked every Sunday signature, every witness she could not place, every seal impression that failed to match. Her fear did not vanish. It changed shape from fog to edge. Lady Fraser did not wait long to press harder. She arrived unannounced one afternoon in a carriage bright enough to proclaim itself, requested Helena in the outer withdrawing room, and spoke before the door fully closed. "You are making yourself talked about in every parish between here and Calder. I am teaching a child to read. You are installing yourself in a widower's household." Lady Fraser's fan snapped open. "Do not affect innocence. You have always had more calculation than charm." Helena stood with hands folded to hide the tremor of anger. "If you came to insult me, you may save your breath." "I came to save you from yourself." Lady Fraser lowered her voice. "Mr. Pritchard is prepared to overlook this absurd interlude if you agree to an announcement at Lady Tukes's memorial assembly next month. Refuse, and I submit the notes to legal review. You know what follows: seizure, disgrace, and no post in England willing to take a girl accused of deceiving her guardian." Helena met her eyes. "If the notes are legitimate, submit them." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lady Fraser's face, quick, then gone. "Boldness is not security," she said. "Remember who fed you." When she had gone, Helena stood alone for several moments, listening to the carriage wheels grind away over gravel. Then she returned to the schoolroom and resumed sorting. 2 evenings later, the house had gone quiet under a hard frost. The boy slept at last, sprawled across his counterpane with one fist curled under his cheek. Helena eased the door nearly shut and found Lord Ashcombe in the corridor beyond, still in coat and cravat, as if he had not undressed for days. "He slept before midnight," she said. "I know." His voice was roughened by low use. "I was outside the door." She hesitated. "My lord, may I ask, why me? Truly." He looked past her toward the nursery, then back. "Because I was at the grave that night," he said. "Not by chance. I go there when the house is unbearable. I heard you before I saw you. My son heard you from the carriage road and slept in the steward's arms before we reached the steps." He drew breath once, controlled. I asked no one else to sing after that because I could not bear another imitation of consolation. The candlestick in Helena's hand wavered. She steadied it. I did not know he heard. I did. His gaze sharpened. And I know what predatory kindness looks like. You are many things, Miss Fraser. You are not that. For a moment, neither moved. Then he inclined his head and stepped back, giving her passage as he had in the graveyard, formal as ever and somehow less distant for it. The next morning brought the final piece. Mrs. Dent sent up another packet from the West Cabinet. Personal correspondence of the late Countess to be sorted for copying before storage. Helena untied the ribbon with careful fingers. Midway through the bundle she found a letter in a feminine hand she had begun to recognise from music annotations and school donations. Graceful, firm, unmistakably the Countess's. It was addressed to Mr. Alistair Fraser. Helena sat down very slowly. The letter thanked her father for agreeing to serve as trustee for the Helena Educational Independence Fund, a sum settled privately by the Countess from her pin money, and intended, upon Helena's 21st year or upon her father's death, to provide income for study, secure lodging, and freedom from compelled marriage. Enclosed, the Countess wrote, were initial transfer orders, with subsequent instalments to follow through Ashcombe accounts. At the bottom, in her father's hand, was a brief acknowledgement, received with gratitude, to be held separate and accounted quarterly. Below that, added later by another hand, Lady Fraser's, was a note. Trustee deceased. Funds redirected to guardian administration per household need. No legal citation. No witness. Helena felt the room tilt, then steady again under sheer will. Humiliation she had endured for years, lectures on gratitude, threats of charity withdrawn, claims of burdens borne for her sake, flared into something colder than anger. Not merely control, theft, deliberate dressed as duty. She gathered the letter, the suspect authorizations, and copies of the promissory notes, and placed them in order by date. Then she crossed to the window and stood looking at the chapel hill, where the yews were black against a white noon sky. Running had tempted her every week since her father died. Run from Lady Fraser, from gossip, from any room where she was told to be grateful for being diminished. But running now would leave the papers in other hands, and the lie intact. When she turned back, her face was calm. She rang for a servant and asked for writing supplies, then drafted 2 notes. One to the parish vicar, requesting certified entries of death dates, trusteeship notices, and witness signatures. The other to the magistrate's clerk, asking the proper form for submitting evidence of forged debt instruments and misappropriated charitable funds. Her hand shook only once, on the word fraud. She blotted the line, rewrote it, and sealed both letters. Fear remained. So did risk. A dependent woman accusing a titled widow could be crushed between laughter and law. Helena addressed the envelopes anyway. "Take these at once," she told the footman. When the door closed behind him, she laid one palm flat on the Countess's letter, as if anchoring it to the table and herself to her choice. The footman had not yet reached the stable yard before Mrs. Dent appeared at the schoolroom door, breathless enough to abandon etiquette. "Miss Fraser, Lady Fraser is below. She has brought a gentleman from Calder. A solicitor." Helena's hand tightened on the pen. "Did she ask for me?" "She asked for Lord Ashcombe, by name, insisted." Through the half-open door came the faint pulse of voices from the lower hall. One cool and masculine, one bright and edged like a blade on porcelain. Helena folded the Countess's letter into her evidence notebook and slid both into her writing case. "Stay with Master," she told Nurse Wilkes softly. "Do not let him come down, whatever you hear." By the time she reached the corridor above the hall, Lady Fraser had already positioned herself beneath the great staircase as though receiving callers in her own drawing-room. Beside her stood a narrow-shouldered man with parchment skin, steel spectacles, and a portfolio tucked beneath his arm. Mr. Pritchard hovered farther back, hat in hand, eyes moving over the panelling with proprietary hunger. Lord Ashcombe faced them from the foot of the library steps, expression blank enough to frighten. Lady Fraser turned as Helena appeared. Satisfaction flashed across her face. "There she is! My lord, I am relieved. You see for yourself she is safe. I feared she had been encouraged into imprudence." Ashcombe did not look at Helena. "State your business." The solicitor cleared his throat. "Mr. Bellamy of Bellamy and Skerritt. I represent Lady Fraser in matters concerning the estate remnants of the late Mr. Alistair Fraser, and certain papers removed without consent from Nether Vale." "Removed?" Helena said before she could stop herself. Lady Fraser lifted one shoulder. "My dear, don't make this uglier than necessary. You are distressed. You have always been suggestible under strain." Bellamy opened his portfolio and produced a folded document. "We request immediate return of all private correspondence and financial instruments belonging to Lady Fraser's household. Failing compliance, we will petition for recovery on grounds of theft and malicious misrepresentation." The word theft landed in the marble hall like a dropped plate. Ashcombe's voice hardened. "You come into my house and accuse my employee of criminal conduct without prior notice?" Bellamy bowed fractionally. "With respect, my lord, the urgency is compelled by circulating rumours that could injure my client's standing. We are prepared to proceed discreetly if Miss Fraser cooperates." Mr. Pritchard spoke at last, oily and loud. "No one wants a scene. A sensible engagement would settle every account. Girl gets a home, widow gets peace, county gets quiet." Helena felt the old panic rise, then flatten under rage. "You forged my father's hand." Lady Fraser's fan snapped open. "Observe, my lord, delusion. Exactly why a guardian must act." For one suspended moment, Helena thought Ashcombe might order them out at once. Instead, he said, clipped and formal, "Miss Fraser will answer through proper channels. You will leave now." Lady Fraser smiled, as if she had won something anyway. At the door she paused and glanced back at Helena. "You have until Lady Tukes's assembly for the late Countess Memorial," she said lightly. "After that, I cannot protect you from consequences." When they were gone, the hall seemed colder than before. Mrs. Dent stared at the tiles. A footman avoided Helena's eyes. Ashcombe dismissed the staff with a gesture and turned to her. "Do you have the papers they named?" "Yes." "Keep them locked. Tell no one where." His gaze sharpened. "From this hour, do not move about the village alone." That evening the first official reply arrived from the magistrate's clerk. Polite, cautious and discouraging. Claims involving guardianship, charitable trust, and alleged forgery would require sworn witness statements and documentary chain of custody. Originals preferred. Petitioning party to present in person. By supper the county had already embroidered the day's visit into scandal. A stable lad repeated hearing Helena had trapped the Earl with songs at his wife's grave. A maid swore Lady Fraser had come only to rescue a hysterical girl from bad advice. 2 invitations to neighbouring houses were quietly withdrawn from Ashcombe's weekly list. Helena sat in the schoolroom after the child slept, watching candle wax pool around the base. If Lady Fraser succeeded, she would lose everything she had built in these few weeks: wages, work, credibility, even the boy's fragile trust. Worse, the theft would remain buried under etiquette and money, and her father's name would carry debts he had not made until no one alive remembered otherwise. She wrote through midnight anyway. dates, copies, references, questions, building a case from fragments while the house settled and sighed around her. The setback came in pieces, each small enough to deny at first, until together they formed a wall. At dawn she went to the vicarage with her working notebook under her cloak, leaving the evidence notebook and the original Countess letter locked in her writing case. Reverend Hollis received her in his study with red-rimmed eyes and fingers ink-stained from account books. "I did receive your note, Miss Fraser," he said, not inviting her to sit. "I am sorry. I cannot provide sworn testimony in this matter." She stared. "You already told Mrs. Ames last month that Lady Fraser asked you to backdate a parish receipt." His face flinched. "I spoke incautiously in confidence." "Then speak carefully in affidavit." He looked toward the closed door, lowered his voice. "Mr. Pritchard holds the mortgage on our roof repairs and my son's apprenticeship bond. If I antagonize him, 3 families lose their places by quarter day, including my curates. I have a parish to keep standing. So truth must wait for better weather? Truth," he said hollowly, "must sometimes survive by degrees." Helena left with no certificate, no statement, and shame that was not hers burning like fever. At Ashcombe House worse awaited. Her writing case lay on her desk exactly where she had left it, lock intact, ribbon tied. Only when she opened it did she feel the floor drop beneath her. The Countess's letter to her father was gone. Not the evidence notebook, not the copied dates in her working book, only that one sheet lifted cleanly from between pages and replaced by air. She searched drawer, shelf, trunk, hearth rug, then searched again with methodical desperation. Nothing. By noon her hands were shaking too hard to hold a pen. Mrs. Dent came at 1 o'clock with strained formality. "Lord Ashcombe requests you in the library." He stood by the hearth when she entered, a second letter open on the desk beside him. She knew before he spoke. "Bellamy has filed notice," he said. "They allege you removed private papers and intend extortion through false claims against Lady Fraser and Mr. Pritchard." "I had the Countess's letter this morning. It has been taken." His jaw tightened. "By whom?" "I don't know." A long silence. "My solicitor advises that while this is pending, your position in the nursery may be represented as undue influence over my household." He said it as if each word cost him. "Until the magistrate hears the matter, I must ask you to leave the main house." For a moment she could not answer. The room seemed distant, as if heard through water. "You believe them?" "I believe," he said, voice low and controlled, "that if I leave you here now, Lady Fraser will call it proof of conspiracy and bury your case under scandal before it reaches a clerk's desk. So I am removed for my own good. I'm trying to keep you from being destroyed in public." She almost laughed at the bitter accuracy. "Public destruction appears unavoidable." He stepped nearer, stopped himself. "You will stay at the old schoolmistress cottage on the East Lane. Ashcombe wages continue. I have assigned a maid you may trust." She swallowed. "And the child?" As if summoned, a sound came from the corridor, quick feet, then a small body at the doorway in stockinged feet, Nurse Wilkes pale behind him. He looked from Helena to his father and back, mouth trembling with effort. "Miss, stay." The 2 words cracked something in her chest. She knelt, gathered him close while he clung with fierce, silent panic. "I must go for a little while," she whispered into his hair. "You are safe. I will come when I can." He shook his head, tears hot against her collar, then folded inward and would not speak again. By dusk, Helena sat in the cottage's narrow front room with 1 trunk, 1 coal scuttle, and the sense of having been pushed to the edge of a map. Her plan had not merely slowed, it had lost its strongest proof. The vicar had stepped back. The house where she had carved out work no longer belonged to her hours. Even the boy's first true plea had ended in separation she could not soften. She set her forehead against the cold window pane and let herself, for 5 whole minutes, doubt everything. In the great house, Ashcombe did not sleep. He stood in his late wife's music room, with a lamp turned low and the curtains unpinned to black glass. Dust had settled on the pianoforte despite the servant's care. On the stand lay the same folio of Scots airs she had favoured, spine cracked to the lullaby Helena had sung in rain. He had once thought grief would be a clean blade, sharp, final, honourable. Instead it was attrition, small cowardices accepted as prudence. He had withdrawn from county dinners, from committees, from oversight, signing what was put before him, so long as no one asked him to speak of her. In that retreat, men like Pritchard multiplied in the margins. He touched the folio and remembered the night his wife died, fever-burned, breath shallow, asking for music he could not provide because he had gone downstairs to settle a tenant fire report that could have waited an hour. When he returned, she was unconscious. He had lived ever since with the arithmetic of that hour. A knock sounded. Not waiting for answer, old Thomas, the valet who had dressed him since Cambridge and seen him break only once, entered with a decanter he pretended was for polishing silver. "You've not eaten, my lord, nor have you if you're hovering." Thomas set the tray down. "Boy woke twice, asked for Miss Fraser once, then shut down hard." Ashcombe closed his eyes briefly. "I know." Thomas hesitated. "Beg pardon, sir, but are you sending her away for good?" "No." "Then why look as if you have?" Because he knew how this county worked. Because standing beside a woman too soon could damn her as surely as abandoning her. Because he had already failed one woman he loved by believing duty was always elsewhere. "She asked me at the grave," he said quietly, not sure why he was speaking aloud, whether grief belonged to rank. I thought insolence. It was courage. Thomas, wisely, said nothing. Ashcombe moved to the escritoire and pulled open the locked lower drawer he had not touched in months. Inside were bound copies of outgoing household correspondence, kept by his wife with obsessive order. He flipped to the autumn entries. There, October, 1 week before her death, an index line. To Mr. Alistair Fraser, Helena Fund, trustee schedule enclosed, carbon copy attached, initials in his wife's hand, not the stolen original. Enough, perhaps, to prove it existed and was no invention. He sat heavily, paper trembling once between his fingers. "I thought keeping silent was restraint," he said to no one in particular. "It was neglect dressed as stoicism." At last he looked up. "Thomas, saddle for first light. I go to Calder to swear records myself." Thomas exhaled, as if he had been holding breath for 6 months. "Yes, my lord." By afternoon the next day, the crisis sharpened. At the cottage, Helena had managed 3 coherent pages of chronology before a knock rattled the door hard enough to shake plaster dust from the lintel. A constable stood outside with his hat in both hands and discomfort plain on his face. "Miss Fraser, notice to appear." He offered a folded paper sealed in red. "At Lady Tukes's assembly for the late Countess Memorial tomorrow evening. Matter of contested guardianship debts and reputational complaint." She broke the seal. The language was florid, the intent blunt. Lady Fraser would make public declaration regarding Helena's future settlement, and failure to attend might be construed as admission against her interest in pending claims. Public declaration. Engagement then, with Pritchard smiling beside the punch bowl while half the county watched. "Who requested this form?" Helena asked. "Filed by Mr. Bellamy." the constable said miserably. Magistrate will be present in formal like. Best if all parties speak where witnesses are. After he left, a second messenger arrived, one of Ashcombe's grooms, mud-spattered and urgent. He carried a short note in Ashcombe's hand. I have obtained duplicate correspondence from my wife's registry and estate ledgers, matching your dates. Bellamy has petitioned to bar you from introducing documents not pre-filed. Bring every copy you hold. I will meet you at the east entrance, 7:30. Helena read it twice, pulse racing. Hope, thin and dangerous, lifted and broke almost at once when she opened her desk drawer to retrieve her packet. Empty. Not only the missing Countess original now, the copied promissory notes, her date chart, even Reverend Hollis's unsigned draft she had coaxed from him after midnight by sheer insistence, gone. The drawer lock hung twisted, wood split at the strike. For a beat she simply stared, unable to absorb the precision of it. Then she searched wildly, trunk to hearth, mattress ticking to coal bin, finding only one loose page caught beneath the desk leg. Her own list of Sunday-dated signatures, half smeared where a boot had stepped on wet ink. Someone had watched her close enough to know exactly what to take, and when. Outside, wheels ground on the lane. Voices, another knock, this one deliberate. Helena moved to the window and saw Lady Fraser's carriage stopped at the gate, lacquer gleaming even in clouded light. Beside it waited Mr. Pritchard, gloved and smiling. A footman stood ready with a wrapped parcel in his hands, as though delivering a wedding gift. The knock came again. Helena set her back against the broken desk, the single surviving page clenched in her fist, and understood with terrible clarity that by tomorrow night she might walk into that assembly for the late Countess Memorial with nothing but memory, and be crushed for it before she spoke a word. The knock came again, measured and patient, as if the person outside already owned the answer. Helena crossed the room, slid the bolt, and opened the door no wider than her shoulder. Lady Fraser stood beneath the black umbrella, rain stippling the silk. "Mr." Pritchard waited by the gate with a smile that looked pasted on in damp weather. Between them, a footman held the wrapped parcel. "My poor dear," Lady Fraser said, all concern and lacquer. "What a miserable lodging. I could not sleep for imagining you here alone." Helena said nothing. Lady Fraser tipped her head toward the footman. "I sent a few necessities. Gloves, a proper gown for tomorrow, and papers you have misplaced in your distress." That struck cleanly. Helena kept her face blank. "A generous impulse," she said, "to return what was never yours." Lady Fraser's eyes sharpened. "Do not be theatrical. We are beyond that luxury." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Inside that parcel is a declaration. You will sign before tomorrow evening that you removed documents without permission, that no fraud occurred, and that Mr. Pritchard has honourably offered marriage to preserve your future." Pritchard's chuckle came from the gate. "Best bargain you'll get, girl." Helena looked past Lady Fraser at him, then back. "And if I do not—" "Then Bellamy presents your conduct as proof of instability and malice. No one in that assembly will hear a word you say." Lady Fraser smiled. "Sign, and your little embarrassment ends quietly." Helena took the parcel from the footman's hands. It was heavier than cloth alone. "I will attend the assembly," she said. Lady Fraser's smile thinned. "Attend, yes. Speak wisely." When the carriage rolled away, Helena carried the parcel to her table, cut the twine and unfolded the paper wrapping with deliberate fingers. On top lay a pale blue gown she had not worn since her father's funeral year. Beneath it, her copied notes, her date chart, Reverend Hollis's draft statement, and the promissory copies, every page taken from her desk. At the bottom, lay a single sheet in Bellamy's hand. Signatures witnessed by 2 parties at Lady Tukes's assembly. Miss Fraser acknowledges misunderstanding and accepts settlement by engagement to Mr. Pritchard. So that was the shape of their mercy. Helena breathed once, hard. Then she gathered everything, added the one smeared page she had kept clenched in her fist, and tucked the packet into her satchel. She did not run to Ashcombe first. She went to the vicarage. Reverend Hollis opened his study door, looking already defeated. "Miss Fraser, I told you—" "You told me truth must survive by degrees," Helena said. "By whose degrees, Reverend? Yours? Lady Fraser's? Mr. Pritchard's?" He flinched. She set the recovered papers on his desk and pulled out the dispersal authorization for the late Countess's charity fund. This was dated the 11th of October. Lady Ashcombe died on the 8th. You buried her on the 12th. You preached from Lamentations at noon and signed the burial register at 2. Were you also witnessing this distribution in Lady Fraser's sitting room that same day, as Bellamy now claims? Colour drained from his face. No. Then write it. He sank into his chair. If I do. Widows in your parish lost coal money because this fund vanished. Girls lost school fees. My father's name carries debts he did not make. If you stay silent now, you are not preserving truth. You are choosing who may kill it. For a long moment he did not move. Then he reached for pen and sand, hands shaking. Dictate, he whispered. She did, dates, places, who requested backdating, what he refused, what pressure followed. When he faltered, she made him start the sentence again until it was plain enough for court, not conscience alone. At the bottom, he signed. Then, after a beat, he rang for his curate as a second witness. By the time Helena stepped back into rain, the church clock was striking 6. Lady Tukes's assembly rooms blazed with candlelight and polished silver, half memorial and half spectacle. Black crape hung around the musicians' gallery for the late Countess. Crystal punch bowls and gossip made the other half of the evening. Helena entered through the east door at 7:30, cloak damp, satchel strapped crosswise beneath it like armour. Lord Ashcombe waited in the side corridor as his note had promised. He looked as if he had not slept in 2 days. "You came," he said. "I have the papers back. She returned them to force my signature." His brows drew tight. "Do you have proof of that?" She held up Bellamy's settlement sheet. "This." Something fierce flickered in his expression. He handed her a sealed envelope. "Carbon copy from my wife's correspondence registry. Ledger extracts attached. I have signed affidavit to chain of custody." He hesitated. "If you want me beside you from the first moment, I will." Helena shook her head once. "Not first. If I cannot stand alone now, I will never stand at all." He swallowed, then inclined his head. "Then I stand where you can see me." She stepped into the main room. Lady Fraser had arranged herself near the dais beside Lady Tukes and Mr. Bellamy, draped in mourning lavender, as if grief were a title. Mr. Pritchard shone at her shoulder in new broadcloth. At the rear, Magistrate Marsh stood with 2 constables, and the expression of a man expecting an evening of unpleasant civility. When enough guests had gathered, Lady Tukes tapped a glass for attention and offered pieties for the late Countess. Then Lady Fraser rose smoothly. "In these sorrow-shadowed months," she began, voice carrying, "we have all wished to protect the vulnerable from misstep and cruel talk. I therefore make, with humility, a family announcement regarding my stepdaughter, Miss Helena Fraser, whose future is now generously secured." "Stop!" Helena's own voice surprised her. Clear, level, not loud, but cutting through the room like a knife through wet linen. Heads turned, fans stilled. She walked forward until she stood between the dais and the crowd, pulse striking hard behind her ribs. She bowed to the magistrate, not to Lady Fraser. Sir Edwin, before any announcement is made in my name, I petition to submit evidence of forged debt instruments, coercion, and misappropriation of charitable trust funds." A murmur surged. Lady Fraser laughed lightly. "You see her agitation. My Lord Magistrate, this is precisely the delusion we hope to spare her from." Helena unbuckled her satchel and laid papers on the nearest card table, flattening each sheet with steady hands. "Mr. Bellamy alleges I stole documents. Here is his own settlement draft, delivered to me this afternoon in exchange for silence and engagement to Mr. Pritchard." She held it up. "Read line 3 aloud." Bellamy did not move. "Read it," Magistrate Marsh said. Jaw tight, Bellamy took the sheet. "Miss Fraser acknowledges misunderstanding and accepts settlement by engagement." "Enough." Marsh extended his hand for it and read the remainder himself, eyes narrowing. Lady Fraser snapped her fan shut. "An unfortunate private draft, never executed." "Alongside," Helena said, lifting the stack of copied notes, "the very documents removed from my locked desk yesterday. Returned wrapped in that draft. If this is misunderstanding, it is an organised one." Pritchard barked. "Any servant could have lifted scraps for coin." Helena turned to him. "Then perhaps you can explain the ink on your boot from my cottage floor. Or shall I ask the constable to compare?" Pritchard glanced down involuntarily. "Stupid and fatal!" A ripple ran through the room. Helena didn't wait. She faced the magistrate again. "These promissory notes bear my father's forged signature. I challenge dates and seals." She began naming them. Note 1. Dated Sunday 3rd of May. "My father never conducted private business on Sundays. Reverend Hollis will attest his presence at parish vestry from noon until dusk that day." Note 2. Witnessed by Samuel Pike, who had already left county service 4 months earlier. Note 3. Seal impression, off-centre and shallow, unlike Nethervale's brass die at that period, which cracked at the rim in February and left a distinct notch absent here. She could feel the room leaning toward her now, not with kindness, but with attention sharpened to fear. Lady Fraser struck back at once. "Parlour cleverness. A girl who read too many ledgers now mistakes memory for law." "Then let law hear witnesses." Helena lifted Reverend Hollis's signed statement. "Sworn this evening before Curate Ames." "Reverend, if you please." The vicar stood near the rear wall, pale and sweating. For one heartbeat Helena thought he would fold. Then he stepped forward, voice thin but audible. He confirmed the backdating request. He confirmed refusal. He confirmed being asked to keep parish peace thereafter. Lady Fraser's composure cracked. "You weak, ungrateful little man." "Lady Fraser," Marsh barked, "control yourself." Helena placed Ashcombe's envelope on the table and opened it. "From Ashcombe Correspondence Registry, carbon copy of Lady Ashcombe's letter establishing the Helena Educational Independence Fund under my father's trusteeship. Date and ledger entries match. Distribution marked separate from guardian household expenses. Yet after my father's death, annotation appears in Lady Fraser's hand redirecting funds without legal authority." Bellamy snapped. "Carbon copies are secondary evidence and inadmissible absent originals." "Then produce the originals you claim do not exist," Helena said. "Silence." She looked directly at Lady Fraser. "You had them this afternoon." For the first time, Lady Fraser's eyes flashed with naked hatred. "You insolent little beggar! After all I fed, clothed, endured, you stole from your own parish widows and from me, then tried to sell me to your creditor to close the books." Gasps. A dropped glass shattered near the musicians' gallery. Lady Fraser wheeled toward the crowd. "Do not listen to this. She has bewitched this county with tears and ballads." A voice cut across hers from the side of the room, low and unmistakable. "No." Lord Ashcombe stepped forward at last, face carved in iron. "I have reviewed my late wife's ledgers personally. Miss Fraser's dates are exact. The charitable bequest was never lawfully redirected. My steward's records confirm discrepancies in seal and witness that align with her claim." He looked at Marsh. "I submit sworn affidavit and estate books for immediate seizure of relevant papers." Marsh nodded once to the constables. "Secure Lady Fraser's dispatch box and Mr. Pritchard's effects. Now." Pritchard lunged for the side door. One constable caught his arm. The other took him at the shoulder hard enough to spin him back into a chair. From his inner coat spilled folded papers tied in green ribbon. The missing originals, crest seal broken and resealed twice. The room inhaled as one body. Lady Fraser did not faint. She stood rigid, then lifted her chin with brittle grandeur as the constable requested her keys. "I will not be handled like a thief," she said. Marsh's expression did not change. "Then do not behave like one." When she still did not move, he added, "Refusal will be recorded." Slowly, with fingers that had not shaken once in 20 years of county performance, Lady Fraser unclasped the key ring at her wrist and dropped it into the constable's hand. They did not carry her out screaming. That would have been easier. She fought as long as she had language. In Lady Tukes's side retiring room, where preliminary statements were taken while the assembly dissolved into shocked knots, Lady Fraser sat upright on a narrow settee and dismantled every accusation with aristocratic contempt. The girl is vindictive. The vicar is compromised. The Earl is grieving and suggestible. Mr. Pritchard manages many papers. Confusion is inevitable. Bellamy, white around the mouth, attempted to salvage process. My client disputes intent. At worst, clerical irregularity. Helena stood opposite with Marsh at the escritoire, repeating facts as if placing stones. Date, signature, chain, motive. Each time Lady Fraser twisted a point, Helena answered with document and sequence. When Lady Fraser denied ever possessing Helena's packet, Helena produced the parcel wrapper itself, marked with Nethervale livery wax and the footman's initials. The footman, summoned, confirmed delivery by my lady's order. When Lady Fraser claimed the settlement draft was Bellamy's invention, Bellamy blanched and admitted he wrote it upon instruction conveyed. Marsh wrote faster. Pritchard, sweating through his collar, tried another angle. Even if there was adjustment, girl owed maintenance. Widow had right to expenses. Helena turned on him. Maintenance does not include threats of forced marriage to creditor. Shall I read your note from March 12th? She had found it, folded inside the returned packet. Settle the girl before quarter day or I call your notes. Pritchard's mouth opened, closed. Lady Fraser's voice dropped to a hiss. You pried through private correspondence like a maid in a drawer. I audited fraud, Bellamy snapped. Miss Fraser, you are not counsel. No, she said. I am the injured party. That is why I learned to read everything. Marsh lifted his head. Enough! He looked from one face to another, then addressed the constable. On evidence presented and documents seized, detain Mr. Pritchard on suspicion of forgery and extortion. Lady Fraser is to surrender travel papers and remain under supervision pending formal charge of fraud, coercion and misappropriation of trust funds. Lady Fraser rose in one fluid motion. You cannot. I can and have. She turned to Helena then, all mask gone, voice low and venomous. Do not mistake this night for victory. A woman alone with a stained name remains at the mercy of memory. Helena met her gaze steadily. Then I am fortunate my memory is exact. That, more than arrest, seemed to break something. Not tears, Lady Fraser had too much pride for that, but a visible fracture in the smooth authority she had worn like silk. She sat back down as constables moved to either side. For the first time she looked small. When they led Pritchard past the door, he spat toward Helena's hem and missed by a foot. "Bitch!" he muttered. Marsh heard. "Add intimidation to his record." Bellamy asked for a carriage and was told to wait until his own statement was complete. The assembly's music never resumed. Near midnight, the hall finally emptied. Wax gutters smoked in silver sticks. Outside, rain had stopped, leaving the steps slick and the air raw with thaw. Helena stood under the portico with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Her bones felt hollowed by adrenaline and silence. She had spoken for hours without trembling. Now her knees threatened mutiny. Reverend Hollis approached, hat crushed between damp palms. "Miss Fraser, I am sorry. For delay. For cowardice." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Do better with the next frightened person." "I will." He bowed and went. Mrs. Dent arrived with Helena's cloak and, after a hesitation, settled it around her shoulders herself. "Master asked twice for you before sleeping," she said quietly. "He used your name." The words hit harder than the magistrate's ruling. Helena blinked against sudden stinging heat. "I can't return yet." "Not yet," Mrs. Dent agreed, "but the nursery is no longer closed to you." In the carriage to Ashcombe's East Lane cottage, because Marsh had insisted she not remain alone that night, Helena sat opposite Lord Ashcombe in near darkness, wheels hissing over wet road. For several minutes neither spoke. At last he said, "You were magnificent." She gave a short, tired breath that might have been a laugh. "I was terrified." "So was I." He looked out at the black hedgerows. "Not for myself." She studied his profile, the strain etched along it. "You kept your word. You stood where I could see you." "I wanted to cross the room when she began. I thought you would break if I didn't." "I nearly did." He turned back. "And then you did not." At the cottage gate he stepped down first, offered his hand and waited until she was steady on the stones. "Magistrate Marsh will convene formal hearing in Calder within 10 days, he said. "My affidavits are lodged, the seized documents are sealed." Helena drew a breath against the night's bite. "If the charges hold, my bequest—" "Restored. With interest if there is any justice left." She looked up at him, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. "And if there is not, then we make noise until there is." Something in her unclenched at that. Not trust newly born, but trust acknowledged. Inside the cottage, with the fire laid and the maid already asleep in the kitchen alcove, Helena sat at the table and untied her satchel one final time. The papers were real, still there, edges ragged from too many hands, and one long night. She touched the Countess's carbon copy gently. Not rescued, not ruined, not yet safe, but no longer voiceless. When dawn thinned the sky, she was still awake, and for the first time in years she was planning a future that did not begin with endurance. The hearing in Calder was less dramatic and more brutal than the assembly. No gasps, no fans, only law grinding through testimony. Lady Fraser never confessed. Pritchard tried to bargain. Bellamy distanced himself and produced correspondence that incriminated them further by proving he had been warned of irregular dates, and proceeded anyway. Under cross-examination, the sealmaker from York testified that Pritchard had commissioned a duplicate die months earlier. The bank clerk from Darrow confirmed unusual withdrawals from charitable sub-accounts into an intermediary account opened by Lady Fraser's steward. When Helena read the Countess's registry copy into record, her voice did not shake. At the close, Magistrate Marsh ordered prosecution for fraud, forgery conspiracy, and coercive financial abuse. Interim order barred Lady Fraser and Pritchard from any claim on remaining Fraser property pending civil settlement. Parish records were amended to acknowledge the Helena Educational Independence Fund as separate trust, unlawfully diverted, now restored with accrued interest and costs. The day the parish clerk entered the correction, he sanded the line, blew gently, and turned the ledger for Helena to see. Her name sat there in ink that no one else controlled. She put her hand flat beside it and exhaled. In early summer, after the legal dust began to settle, Lord Ashcombe asked Helena to meet him in the old music room at dusk. The windows were open to a soft green evening. Swallows stitched the air above the lawn. On the pianoforte lay 2 ledgers, a stack of school proposals, and a new employment contract. He did not ask her to sit. He stood near the instrument, hands braced on its edge, and said without preface, "I want to speak plainly. No rank, no euphemism." "All right." "I love you!" The words landed between them with startling quiet. He swallowed once. "I loved my wife. I do not apologize for that, and I will not insult you by pretending this feeling is untouched by grief. But it is not grief. It is you. Your mind, your courage, your infuriating precision, the way you refused to disappear even when disappearing would have been easier for everyone around you, including me." Helena's breath caught. She had expected care, perhaps affection tempered by decorum. "Not this," he went on, voice roughening. "When you were removed to the cottage, my son stopped speaking again for 2 days. I stood outside his door hearing him sob and understood that silence is not nobility when people depend on you. I have spent years mistaking restraint for virtue. You ended that." She found her own voice. "I love you too." He closed his eyes briefly, as if the admission struck physically. "But," she added, and saw him straighten in wary attention, "I will not step from one dependence into another, however kind. Not yet." He nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need." She crossed to the table and placed her hand on the top contract. "Work I choose. Wages in my own name. Authority over the schoolroom reforms and the Countess's music charities. Formal authority, written, audited. No hidden benevolence. No allowance disguised as favour." A flicker of wry warmth touched his mouth. "You negotiate like a barrister." "My father trained me on ledgers. Life trained me on predators." He sobered. "Done. All of it. If you never marry me, those terms still stand." She searched his face, found no trace of pity there, only steadiness, and fear honestly borne. "You asked me once," she said softly, "if there was coercion. There isn't now." He stepped closer, but did not touch her. "May I court you, then? Properly. In daylight. With my son likely underfoot and half the county pretending not to watch." Helena laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "They will absolutely watch." "Then let them take notes." She reached for his hand. "Yes, court me." He turned his palm and laced their fingers, grip careful, reverent almost. "Thank you." Months passed not as montage but as days with weather and work. At the village school, Helena stood before a room of girls reciting sums while carpenters fitted new benches, paid from recovered charity funds. She hired a music teacher for Wednesdays and sat in on every lesson the first term, refusing to let the programme become ornamental philanthropy. Mrs. Dent, promoted to oversee domestic training stipends for widows, argued with Helena over coal allotments and grinned when corrected. In the nursery, the boy, Thomas Alister, though everyone still called him Master Tom, began speaking in bursts, then in stubborn torrents. One wet afternoon he informed Helena that frogs could not possibly prefer hymns to drums, and when she asked why, he said, "Because drums are louder and frogs are rude." He then ran to tell his father exactly the same theory with solemn conviction. At dinner one evening, Ashcombe listened to his son's frog doctrine, met Helena's eyes over the child's head, and smiled without reserve for the first time she had seen. When mourning proprieties ended in the following spring, he asked her to walk with him to the chapel hill. No audience waited, only wind and the early scent of thaw. At the yew hedge he stopped, took both her hands, and said, "I asked for your voice in my house because my son needed sleep. I ask for your hand now because I need your life beside mine, if you freely choose it, not from gratitude, not from rescue. Choose me or do not, but know that I have never wanted anything more." Helena felt rainless air in her lungs, steady and full. "I choose you," she said. He kissed her there, under bare branches and indifferent crows, with no shadows between them. On a bright March morning a year later, Helena stood in the chapel yard, with sunlight on wet stone, and her husband beside her. Not behind her, beside. She wore no mourning black now, only deep blue wool and plain gloves, still damp from arranging lilies on the late Countess's grave. The ironwork had been cleaned. The name on the stone shone clear. At the foot lay a small posy, tied by Master Tom's impatient hands, ribbon askew. Tom fidgeted near the yew and whispered loudly, "Is it the sleep song?" "Yes," Helena whispered back, "the sleep song." Lord Ashcombe, John now in private, though never in public, inclined his head to her with that same grave courtesy he had offered in rain the first night, transformed by everything spoken since. She sang. The old Scots lament rose into March light, not as panic's brace this time, but as memory and gratitude braided together, for the dead, for the living, for the girl who had once stood here soaked and cornered and refused to bow to theft disguised as duty. When she finished, the church bell began, clear and unhurried. Tom slipped his hand into hers. Ashcombe took her other hand. They stood a moment longer before turning toward home, the path no less muddy than before and no longer a road to a cage.